That.
There's
You got a quorum,
we still do.
and you all look the same after 2 years. All right, let's call the meeting of the TAB, Transportation Advisory Board of the Met Council to order. It is 12:33 on May 18th, 2022. This is the first time we've been live in, I think, a couple of years. So I had to get familiar with all kinds of things again. I like that arm being up over at the U.S. Bank. Yeah. Drive in.
Drive out.
I'm hoping it's up when we go out.
It probably won't.
We've got to do, well, we've got everybody live, so we don't have to do the usual thing that we were doing online with regard to roll call. Just have Jana do the roll call first, and then we'll go to the agenda. I've got a change in the agenda that we need to make. I'll need to have an amended agenda, but we'll do roll call first.
Anderson. Here. Bailey. Barber. Here. Barnes. Crimmins. Dugan.
Here.
Foster.
Here.
Geisler.
Here.
Giuliani Stevens.
Here.
Gattell.
Here.
Hanson.
Here.
Holberg. Hollinshead.
Here.
Jalali. Jepson.
Here.
Karwoski.
Here.
Keeley. Koski. Lewis. Lindeke.
Here.
Look.
Here.
Malichnik. Martinson.
Here.
Mattis Castillo.
Here.
Buin.
Here.
Naryanan.
Here.
Petrick.
Here.
Schember.
Here.
Stephenson. Ulrich.
Here.
Williams. Winshuttle.
Here.
And Workman.
All right, very good. If you look at the Action Transmittal 2022-20, that's the MVTA tip amendment, there was some incorrect information provided to the TAC. We've got some corrected numbers there, so I need to, we need to pull that one off of the consent agenda and put it over with the other regular business items. So if someone would make a motion that we have an amended agenda that moves 2022-20 to be an action item, I'd appreciate that. Thank you. Member Anderson, Commissioner Look seconds. Any further discussion? All those in favor of approval of the amended agenda as stated, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Carried. I got to remember I can't vote here. So reports. Well, first of all, let me welcome everybody that's here. Great to see everybody again. And I don't know if we have anybody from the public that wishes to address the TAB on a matter of concern to them. They're sure welcome to come forward at this point in time. All right. We'll move on into reports. We didn't have an exec committee meeting this particular reporting period this month, so I don't have anything to report out on from the exec committee, and nothing further that I've gotten from Elaine, so I don't have anything else that I want to do there. I do need to read this. Elaine is pointing at this. I need to read. The Minnesota Open Meeting Law permits public bodies to conduct meetings by telephone or other electronic means if, quote, the presiding officer, chief legal counsel, or chief administrative officer determines that an in-person meeting is not practical or prudent because of a health pandemic or an emergency declared by the governor under Chapter 12, and then there's a Minnesota statutory citation. At this time, there is no emergency declaration, and the TAB meeting is back in person. If the meetings were to be set up to be hybrid, it would require that TAB members' meeting locations would need to be published as public space with the agenda. We have extended the meeting table, and TAB members are free to sit throughout the room. A meeting room has been reserved next to the chambers for staff and the public to watch the meeting via streaming capabilities that we've got. So I did run into Judge Shetland, legal counsel and chief lobbyist for the MAC in the hallway, and I told him, hey, we need to go back to virtual meetings, talk to the governor about having folks that are involved in boards and commissions or governmental employees have the ability at least to go back to virtual meetings. So having provided that information, we've got a amended agenda, and then I'm going to go on to MnDOT. Is Mike Barnes here? Oh, John, you going to take care of that?
Sure, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll just relay comments from Mike Barnes. He's not feeling well today. So A couple things to start out with is the TZD conference that Mr. Barnes alluded to last month did take place up in Brooklyn Center over the last month. There were 100 or a little more than 100 participants that took part in that, so very well attended. And along those lines of safety, the safety statistics here, or fatality numbers, as of 15 May are 110 fatalities for the state, which is 20% lower than 21, but still 11% higher than in 2019. Of the causes, speed-related fatalities are 53% lower than 21 and 38% still higher than 19. And then another interesting piece of that is distracted fatalities right now are at 8, which is approximately the same as they were in 2018 when the distracted driver law went into effect. So it is higher than we've had in previous years. Additional to that, the SMTP, which you all have heard about, will be going out for public comment here in the next month, so be on the lookout for that. And then, as we all know, winter is now over, so that means construction is full bore, as some of you may have encountered on the way in with 35E and 94 and many of the other corridors that are under construction or will be impacting your commutes or driving to various places here over the summer. And then finally, the last piece is we still don't know who our commissioner is, so stay tuned for that. That's all I have, Mr. Chair.
All right, thank you, Chair Solberg. I'll have you come back up momentarily for a TAC report. Member Bewin, nice to see you in person. MPCA, anything to report out on there?
Not much today, just to make note that later we'll have Amanda Smith from our staff presenting on the climate action framework here as an information item. Other than that, we don't have anything to report today.
All right, very good. Thank you, sir. The MAC, Carl couldn't be with us today. Member Crimmins did send in to me and to Elaine a brief report from the MAC, and I'll read that for him. So 2022 passenger activity is 17% below the 2019 level. 2021 passenger activity was 47% below the 2019 level. 2022 flight operations are predicted to be 108,906. Total operations 2021 were 95,152, so we're seeing improvements. Parking in April 2021 was 11,618 vehicles, and parking in April 2022 was at 17,028. And the concessions continue to expand their open hours while passenger activity increases. And that is the report from Member Crimmins regarding activities at the MAC. And then we'll move on to Member Barber, reporting out for the Met Council.
Thank you,
Barbara.
Mr. Chair. So I've got a series of things both from Met Council and some other items from Metro Transit. So from the Met Council side of things, North Star, as we talked last time, I'm working on a study of the North Star commuter rail, and we're working to get the contract signed this month. The study will look at a range of options for policymakers to consider. It will cover a full slate of options everywhere from stopping it to extending it and sort of everywhere in between. It's not going to provide a recommendation, but it will give us a variety of things to look at and decide from. Metro Mobility has really bounced back since the early days of the pandemic. Right now, we're consistently providing over 35,000 rides per month, and we're at more than 80% of pre-pandemic levels. Another big item that we're working on, you may have heard that Metro Transit, we were required to provide a zero emissions bus plan to the legislature. We did that in February, and we have a good plan going forward about how we're going to electrify our fleet. Currently, we're working on the zero emission bus plan for the region. And this applies to the regional 1,150 bus fleet in coordination, and we're doing this in coordination with our suburban providers. This is going to be a really good step to have a good cohesive regional perspective for the zero emissions bus plan. For Metro Transit, ridership right now. Oh, okay. You all can hear me, but no one else can. Okay. All right. Good thing I'm loud. Okay. All right, so ridership is up 20% from 2021. The highest percentage of that is actually on local bus, which includes our ABRT lines. Bus alone is up 22%, and light rail is up 20%. By type of ridership, over 5 million rides on local routes have occurred the first quarter of 2022, over 600,000 on BRT, and almost 200,000 on Express. Downtown activity continues to be down. It is 30 to 40% of pre-COVID levels. It's growing, but it's far from pre-COVID levels. Generally, the basic takeaway of what we're seeing is there is growth across all the modes, and one other bright star that we're seeing is the Orange Line is really off to a good start so far. Our plan going forward is to continue to monitor COVID outbreaks and their impact on ridership and the return to office patterns. We expect to see changes in return to office over the next few months, and we're really curious to see what it looks like, because we're in our ridership patterns, you're not necessarily seeing a peak in the morning and a peak in the evening as we had seen pre-pandemic. We're seeing peaks at different times of day, and so it's something we're going to have to monitor closely as people come back to work. The other thing we need to monitor definitely going forward is our workforce. There are, just like every other entity right now in business in the metropolitan region, we are having labor shortages and desperately looking for additional operators and police. It's very important that we build some of that up. As we have an expanding system, we want to make sure that we can be responsive as we start to recover more ridership after the pandemic. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Any questions for Councilmember Barber? Yes. Commissioner Ulrich.
Well, yeah, and I want to go back to your report, just a question, if I can later, but on the Barber's, Commissioner Barber's, or Chair Barber's, what's your title?
Council member.
Councilmember Barber's report. You know, I think of North Star in relationship to how I would think of MVTA. If MVTA was forced to cut service, one of the things we for sure wouldn't cut would be state fair service, very popular, and I liken that to the question of Twins games or sporting events on North Star. Can you give any comment or more detail on that? Seems to be like a popular portion of North Star, just like State Fair would be for MVT. So you can say more on that?
Certainly, I can talk a little bit about that. I don't want to go down too far in the weeds, but I can definitely talk a little bit about that. Basically, because of the delay we've had in some of the payment for operations, we have enough service and to operate the commuter side of things, enough trains, because that's, when we surveyed the ridership, or the riders, that was their most important thing, and there are some people who do rely on that. And so at this point, we're keeping it there. We do, as we get the operation payments reconciled going future, then we will look at how we can expand additional service for special events.
Okay. And then one question I had about your report was, are we anticipating a hybrid option? Are you exploring that, or what? You know, we're in person now, but is there any thought of hybrid, or what's been discussed?
I haven't had any conversation with staff about that, and I don't know whether staff's had any conversations internally, but. Elaine?
Based on what we've learned, if we went hybrid, any tab member who was attending at a remote location would have to publish their location and it would become a public space. So that is, right now, we aren't doing that, but we can look into that. I guess.
No, there seems like there must be a way to get around that, because I have meetings that you'd think would be under that same criteria, but we're able to still be hybrid. MVTA is hybrid, our you know, other
It's specific.
committees I'm on can still do hybrid. So I guess I would encourage the attorneys for the Met Council.
Yeah, we did have, check with our legal staff, and there were specific meetings that had to be in person. It was the council itself, the council's committees, and TAB. All our technical committees are able to continue remote. So there's a difference between whether there's staff meetings versus elected officials on the committees.
Is your county commission running hybrid meetings where you're there live with all the commissioners and other people can call in?
We have a hybrid option for our county board meetings where most recently we've all been, the county commissioners have been live and present. Some of our presenters have been hybrid. There's been times recently where a commissioner's been out of town, be able to join hybrid, and then we've gone to roll call votes. So there's some caveat that has allowed us to do that, so I think there's more to explore on the question, is what I'm pointing at.
Commissioner Look has some insight on it too, I think.
Not on this, on the prior one, so as long as this discussion's over, I'd like to go back to the prior one.
Okay, all
But
right.
isn't, if you as a council or a
County board.
commissioner, you have to be live, but the public can, I think, my understanding is they can Zoom in. But it goes back to what the chair said, if it's one of us that's out, then you have to notify and be in a public spot. I know we looked at all of that. as
We have
well.
a statement in the front of our board meeting packet and in our board chair reads it, that doesn't somehow allow us to have a ability to be hybrid. So I guess I just encourage you to look at it a little more.
Because I thought somebody was drafting a bill to try to make that an option.
Yes.
I don't know where, if it's even in anybody's at this point, but I think that they saw the benefit of how that it can work. But everything that I've been told is that if you as a member of that committee or whatever, or council, you had to be, then you'd have to, like you couldn't be on vacation and go to your hotel room. You'd have to go to the lobby so that anybody walking by can identify that you are there, even though they wouldn't know that. But that's my understanding of how it's written today.
Yeah, it's a lawyer thing, so
And
I'm not gonna try.
There's nothing says people are doing it and just haven't been challenged.
And I also think there's the few meeting a year sort of caveat where you can have a few, sort of almost mulligans where you can join hybrid but not have to do the public location caveat there that you're talking about. I don't have the answer. I'm just saying there's
But
questions.
it does sound like from the opinions that are being offered up, that if you wanted to go to, the county building, and that would be then announced as the space that you were at in conjunction with the meeting, which would be okay, but you might not feel comfortable having your home address given out if you decided to stay home and work from your den.
Well, the reason it comes up is, for example, Scott County, we're in the sort of moderate level. Our health folks are saying we're likely to be in high risk in a couple of weeks. They're feeling there's a surge coming back. So I guess that's the reason why it's an important question. There's a member here that amongst us that told me that if this meeting was 2 weeks earlier, they would have exposed us all to COVID because they got it. And again, if the meeting was 2 weeks earlier, we would have been gotten some exposure from an attendee here. So, I mean, it's just something to look at, think about, get more legal, I think, on it.
Member
That's all I
Koski, thanks for joining us, and we're just discussing the potentiality to have hybrid meetings, and under what circumstances could we do it,
Okay,
as
thank you.
opposed to being live. So
Thank
just
you.
to kind of catch you up on where we are.
Thank you. Apologize for having to
We're
be
just-
late.
That's fine. All right, I'm going to go back to Commissioner Look, who wanted to address, I think, the prior issue that you raised regarding North Star.
Yeah,
Commissioner Look.
thank you, Mr. Chair. I think we discussed this a little bit at the last TAB meeting, but I think there needs to be some clarity on this issue. The service for North Star, first of all, North Star is owned and operated by Metro Transit, we all know that. Service of North Star has been cut by 70%. We did not get, at Anoka County, we did not get a decision in that matter. It was reduced by Metro Transit. I think there was an expectation that the payment in full would be made despite a 70% cut in service. We didn't find that palatable at Anoka County. But as indicated, there's a worksheet, and we can certainly provide it to members here, that was dated October 6, 2021, where The North Star Games were not included, or special events were not included as part of their program delivery. And when we cut service to North Star, it takes 6 months to reinstate service with BNSF. Okay, so it's not an instant on-off switch. The North Star Line Twins games, if anyone's ever ridden that, and if anyone's ever lucky to get a seat, is standing room only. So it might be the only run, okay, that North Star has that might pay for itself. Okay, so it's perhaps a massive miscalculation to cut that portion of what was probably the only successful trip on the whole North Star line. And again, we don't control that. And I would say further that the negotiations were going swimmingly until the article came out, pointing fingers, which was a political miscalculation on Metro Transit's part, because that helped our commissioners dig in at that point. So we're certainly open to negotiation on this. There was a disproportionate amount of COVID dollars given to other transit lines that were not given by percentage to North Star to offset losses. We can go down that whole road if we want to. They're fully aware of it. But I'm going to continue to speak in terms of these topics. Commissioner Ulrich brought it up when it comes up, because there is some less than, I would say, responsible dissemination of information on this topic. And it's a frustrating point for Anoka County. It's a frustrating point for people that use the line. And it'll continue to be frustrating until they reinstate service, at which point, if it's reinstated according to the contract, 100% of the funding will be paid. That's where it's at, so.
All right, well, we certainly hope you can work out these issues that were raised last month for the first time. Member Barber?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do want to point out to my fellow TAB members that for the years that we have operations and have reduced operations, there are reduced amounts that have been requested. And then at the end of the year, it gets reconciled, and actually anything that hasn't been used gets rebated back to the county. So even though there was a 72% or 70% reduction in service, there's a combination of both the operating piece, but also making sure that the pieces of infrastructure that we need to keep in place, whether it's checking trains, checking those sorts of things that are sort of the general regular upkeep and maintenance and part of this whole process, are in play. And so there is some fixed costs, but we have definitely adjusted the dollar amounts relative to the pandemic operation levels.
All right, well, thanks for that information as well. The whole conversation leads me to think about how far down the rabbit hole we want to go on this issue at the tab,
Agreed.
relative to the work that we're doing here, you know. So, Commissioner Ulrich, you had another.
Well, I just want to clarify,
Oh.
nobody queued me up to ask that question, I just was curious, you know, so.
All right. Anyone else? Yes.
Mr. Chair, can I speak about another topic related to?
Mariana, please.
I just wanted to make the tab aware that yesterday Secretary Buttigieg announced the availability of $1 billion in funds to ensure safe streets and roads for all. I think it's relevant to the comments in Mike Barnes's report. So MPOs, cities, towns, and many other jurisdictions can apply. And there's a few webinars that are coming up, June 13th, June 15th, and June 23rd. So I just wanted cities and other local units of government to be aware that some money is available for addressing the crisis.
Member Narayana, if you can circulate that information electronically to Elaine, and then she can get it out to all the members, so to the extent folks want to tune into some of those webinars, they can do so.
I'll do that, Mr. Chair.
That'd be very helpful, thank you. All right, and then on to suburban transit providers. We don't have Dan with us today, but we've got Kevin Burkhart with us. So, Kevin, do you have a report out for suburban transit?
Yeah, thank you. Chair Hovland, members of the board, good to see you all this afternoon. Nice to see people in person. And my name is Kevin Burkhart. I'm filling in for Dan Keeley today. I'm been on the Prior Lake City Council for 6 years. I'm chair of Minnesota Valley Transit Authority, chair of the Suburban Transit Association, and chair of the Highway 169 Corridor Coalition. So thank you all very much for your support of our projects over the years. Very much appreciated. and good to be here with you all today. And I'm an alternate then for Dan Keeley from Suburban Transit today. All right, I'll be brief in my report, and I do understand that before I was here today, you've got a revision to the MBTA tip amendment in front of you here, and I was supposed to provide that, but I see you've got it here, and these numbers are consistent with what I was provided, so this looks accurate, and thank you very much for that adjustment. I think it'll be on the non-consent agenda later. For the suburban transit providers, there are 4 of us. For those of you that don't know, there's Minnesota Valley Transit Association, Southwest Transit, Maple Grove, and then Plymouth SmartLink as well. Our express ridership continues to grow among all 4 of those providers. Our on-demand services continue to see strong numbers. MVTA and Southwest Transit services, it's Connect and Prime, it's called MVTA Connect and Southwest Transit Prime. Both are above pre-pandemic levels. MVTA in particular set a record for our monthly ridership in April since the start of the pandemic. So we were, month over month, we were up 77% for the month of April here in 2022 versus the month of April in 2021. For service changes that we have, our seasonal 4-Fun bus, you may see it running around the South Metro. It's got a full graphic wrap on it. It's orange, difficult to miss, and that provides weekend service for our south of the river, or River South Entertainment District, Mall of America, to Valley Fair, Canterbury, Mystic, and then back to the Mall of America. It's a popular route. Maple Grove is polling riders on downtown Minneapolis route changes right now, including a new route that would provide more coverage in the downtown area, and that service they're looking to start in August. For MVTA, there's a launch of a new mobile app this summer called Ride MVTA. And then, as you know, we have our Burnsville Bus Garage Modernization Project going on, which was long overdue. Thank you for your support of that. And you've got that tip amendment in here today. We had a groundbreaking event there on May 4th that was really well attended and enjoyable. Congresswoman Angie Craig was there, and many others. I think we had 4 or 5 mayors from the area. So thanks very much. Any questions?
Yes. Member Linda Key.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I asked your predecessor, I think a couple months ago, but I was sort of curious about specific numbers of pre-pandemic ridership for some of the fixed route service. I remember Member Barber earlier was saying that 30 to 40% of the downtown activity of transit is where they're at now for that. What is the suburban transit general numbers? I know specifics probably are very detailed, but yeah, where are we at in terms of getting back to where we were before the pandemic?
It's very concerning. It's not good. I would say we're more in the 25 to 30% range of pre-pandemic levels. So I've asked, like at the MVTA, I've asked for a budget assuming that we return at some point in the next year or two to 60% of pre-pandemic ridership. I think it's something that we need to look closely at. I believe all the suburban transit providers are trying to pursue other services that are well attended, for lack of a better word, the on-demand type services in our areas, the suburb to suburb services, direct contract routes that we have, say for Amazon, Mystic Lake, other large employers. So we're really, I would say there needs to be an effort in the next several years to probably redeploy some of the assets that we have to other services like that. I think at this time we're all continuing on with the federal mandate, the federal funding, which was essentially try and maintain your infrastructure as it was. But I certainly see in the next year or two, there's going to be some tough decisions to be made for everybody.
Thanks a lot. Yeah, I just flagged that as a conversation we all need to have going forward, thinking about transit service and even freeway service in general. So thanks very much.
Good. Well, thanks for that question, Member Linda Key. important question. Did Member Barber have her hand up or someone?
I did, but it was.
Member Foster?
In that.
Say again?
I did, but it was answered in.
Oh, okay, all right, very good, thank you. Anyone else? All right, let's move on then to the consent portion of the agenda. That now will consist of items 1, 3, and 4. And I'll bring, or Chair Solberg, you want to come up in conjunction with the consent agenda items, but also if you have a TAC report, we'll take that as we preceding the consent agenda items.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You know, I think for expediency's sake, the TAC did review these items that are in front of you today. Nothing more really to report from TAC this particular month, except that we are maintaining our virtual stance for meetings until September. With that, I'll move into just a review of the consent agenda items. And of course, for those, again, a review, that first item of 2220, which has the item with the MVTA that I believe you guys are pulling off, or pulled off. The first item is, these are new projects to the TIP. And of course, the first one was the St. Paul was awarded a RAISE grant for $1.4 million. And that will be used to study the Rondo area street improvements. The second item, the MVTA item I will go through later. The third one being MnDOT is adding this new project, which is essentially contributing federal dollars to the DNR to reconnect the Gateway State Trail that was disconnected when I-35 was built. So that new connection is being provided as part of the DNR's project. And then finally, the third piece in that one is MnDOT providing purchase of buses to Shakopee, Minnewacat, and Sioux, and Sioux community, and that was through our clean transportation solicitation. So those are those three items. Items under number 22-21, streamline amendments for 3 cost increases, really come back to 3 MnDOT projects. The first one being enhanced mobility for seniors, and that's again a project that's funded through MnDOT to purchase buses for, in part because of industry-wide inflation, right? Those numbers are going up across the board. The second one, MnDOT is increasing the total project cost on the I-494 bridge rehabilitation project that will start in 2023. And again, this one, as you're aware of, I think you've heard of before, we've talked about, it's about a $65 million project. We did, in this case, get $17.7 million of the CARISA funds that we're putting on that, and that distributes across the project and allows us to reallocate some other funds, but it does cover the cost increase. And then third is US 52 concrete pavement project down in Dakota County. And that project cost through duration has increased as well. I think from a total of, where were we, 62 million to 65 million. And that's really, again, those are from MnDOT projects. They're not solicitation funds. So that's those 3 projects. And then moving on to 2022-22. And again, we're going to get confused with some of the STIP numbers here, but the first one, again, being 3 termini changes. So again, changes in the length of projects. And that first one is a project on 169. It's a traffic management system down in Scott County. And it's just revising some of the length there, adding $75,000 to the project so that we have that virtual information on the roadway. The second one is decreasing the project length, and that's I-35W landscaping project. The cost stays the same, but effectively that is a project where the costs have gone up. We've revised it back and are delivering a project still that will make sense. And then the third one is adding a location to the 394 ramp intersections that come into downtown Minneapolis. And so adjusting that project with the 3rd Street addition there and some additional work that's taking place. And again, those are out of MnDOT funds. And that, those are overview of the consent agenda items, Mr. Chair. I'll stand for any questions.
Good, thank you. I think because of the nature of these streamlined matters, we tried to consolidate them by type. So you've got the 3 cost increases on 2020, or 2022-21, and then the 3 termini changes on 2022-22. As you say, all MnDOT projects and all MnDOT money, no regional funds involved. So are there questions for Chair Solberg on any of these matters? Yep.
I'll second.
All right, very good. Got a motion and a second to approve the items on the consent agenda, which are the minutes, and then 2022-21 and 2022-22 in a single motion. Any further questions? Member Martinson?
Thank you, Chair Hovland. I just had a quick clarifying question. It wasn't clear from the materials provided, that realignment and reconnection of the Gateway Trail.
Yes.
Is that east of 35E or is that going to be west of 35E?
Mr. Chair and Member Martinson, the connection is on the west side of 35E. So if you recall, the Gateway used that, I think it was the old railroad bridge that crossed and then kind of had a diagonal. What this will do is make the connection from the south up to the roadway bridge on the north and then cross.
Great, thank you so much.
Good. Any further questions, comments? All right, very good. We've got a motion and a second with respect to approval of the items on the consent agenda in a single motion. Hearing no further discussion, all those in favor of adoption of the consent agenda items identified, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Carried. All right, Chair Solberg, let's go then to the non-consent business portion of the agenda. Then let's take up, first of all, the one that we removed from the consent agenda, and that's 2022-20, which involves the MVTA and the correction of some numbers.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair. So that first item, MVTA, was awarded a discretionary grant for, and as Mr. Burkhart alluded to already, the expansion of the bus garage. I think it commonly referred to as Phase 3. MVTA has requested that this move forward in an expedited manner. For the committee's information, this information came to TAC. It had the wrong numbers in front of it. However, in relation to that, the TAC has not been in a position in the past, it's very unlikely that we would have changed our recommendation on that moving forward. But again, this is for the Burnsville bus garage apron, basically upgrades to their facility for a total of 3.5. I got the wrong number again.
Sorry, yeah, 6.2.
6.2 million.
Thank you.
So this is the difference between being live and in person versus having 3 monitors in front of you to look at your information. So with that, it's my belief that TAC would have reviewed this and would not have had any substantial comments to it.
Questions? Chair Solberg, with respect to this matter? You've got a clarifying or revised motion in front of you as it pertains to the MVTA tip amendment. So there's 4 parts to this. So it looks to me like can we handle it in a single motion, or should we handle this motion first?
Add 4 new projects.
Yeah. All right. So the suggested motion at the, on the supplemental handout is that the Transportation Advisory Board recommends adoption of an amendment to the 2022 through 2025 TIP to add the 4 new projects, adjusting the cost of the MVTA Section 5339 project to $6,200,000 total, $4,960,000 federal dollars, and $1,240,000 MVTA match. Is there a motion to that effect?
Move approval.
Thank you, Mr. Hanson.
Burkhart seconds.
All right, very good. Got a motion and a second on a revised motion 2022-20. Any further discussion? Commissioner Look?
Mr. Chair, just on item number 1 there, can I get a little background on the Rondo area street improvements? What's planned there? I understand they're studying it for 1.4, but what's the project scope?
I know a little bit about this, Mr. Chair. I know it's a transportation area plan for that whole area. It's not necessarily relegated to one specific item, if I recall right, but I believe Mr. Isaacson is here from Ramsey County, may be able to explain some more.
Is this the $5 billion proposition?
No.
Okay.
Chair members, I can speak at like a 10,000-foot level, because I think that that's where this is. This was a grant that was to study the road network that would support that, and it involves some county roads. We've had some conversations with the city. The city put forward a proposal, so it's more of a network study, and I believe roughly the area, so say Dale to Lexington and maybe north to south, more like University to maybe Selby or Summit, that general area. It's more of a road network plan, no construction.
So,
Go ahead, Commissioner.
just for clarification, then, this isn't an endorsement necessarily of the, let's call it the mother project.
The lid?
The lid, yeah.
Mr. Chair, I think, again, having just couple hands in the pie on this one, the study was really relegated to what is the transportation network in that vicinity, just like Mr. Isaacson said. So we're talking about city streets, county roads, not necessarily what is the future or what could be a land bridge, but it would certainly take into account some of the city and neighborhood desires for a land bridge, but that's not the main purpose of this. It is not the land bridge.
Looks like it's identified as the Rondo Area Street Improvement Study for 1.4 million. So, any other follow-on questions?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I'm just suspicious about it, I guess, from the standpoint that with limited dollars, we, kind of start down the nose of the camel gets underneath the tent, let's say, and I'm reluctant, I guess, from that standpoint, but I'll trust that it's just identifying streets and how to make it flow a little better over there, but my assumption is that the study will be done to justify the lid, if you call it that, or whatever you want to call it.
Land bridge, whatever.
Yeah.
Okay, any further comment, questions? We got a motion and a second in front of us on 2022-20 as revised. All those in favor of the passage of the revised motion on 2022-20 say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. Chair Solberg.
All right, Mr. Chair, I just want to verify we have, that is 2020, and we took care of all the rest of the consent items, correct?
Correct. We're on
Okay.
2022-19.
All right, we're on 2022-19. Okay, so in front of you, tab members, what you'll see is a request from the city of St. Paul effectively to change the scope of the project, Safe Routes to School project that they had proposed that would remove a connection from the Bruce Bento Trail to Arkwright Street. Now, what you'll notice is this isn't a whole lot different than maybe some of the others, as there's a very slight difference in cost. However, because this one did go through the solicitation for Safe Routes to School, it is a scope change that comes under TAB's purview. So what is being proposed is that the city would not construct that portion of the trail, which is approximately $23,000 of the overall cost, but that the DNR would pick that up as part of the work that they'll be doing to the Bruce Bento Trail. TAC did recommend that the city keep the additional $23,000. Very minor. This is pretty typical of these types of projects that have come through TAC and TAB, where if the work is being completed by another entity, that they continue the funds. One thing of note is it's very close to that 80% limit for federal funds. That is something our state aid does track on these projects and is able then to, when it gets, if it is at 80% upon award, not estimate as you see here, they would make that correction and the funds would be returned to Met Council, the additional funds. So at this point, it would meet the 80%, and we would expect that to be the case because prices seem to be rising faster than they are in normal years. And with that, Mr. Chair, TAC did recommend approval of the scope change.
All right, so it looks like from the memo that approximately $18,400 in federal dollars would be returned to the tab. And what we have here really is a Safe Routes to School project that, because of a scope change, it needs to be an action item.
Yeah, and
for the
right
tab.
now, Mr. Chair, the TAC did recommend that those funds stay with the city as part of that larger
All right,
project.
okay, good,
Yeah.
thank you. Questions for Chair Solberg on 2022-19? Is there a motion to adopt? Commissioner Look.
Mr. Chair, I recall in the past, we've had, when scope changes have occurred, we have made reductions. It's a small amount, I get that, but is it setting precedent that going to impact future?
And Mr. Chair, if I may, I think, yeah, recently, what you've seen come through is as long as the project components were still being completed, that it was achieving the goals that TAB had set as part of those projects when awarding those funds and did not reduce the funds. That is not always the case, as Commissioner Look is attesting to. But again, with $23,000, I'm not sure anybody could pull off much more than a report, let alone a project with that amount of money, so.
All right.
So TAC is again recommending that that money stay with the project, stay to that larger SRTS project that likely will come in more than what is projected. And I believe they have a revised estimate as it is right now that is more than what's in your packet.
All right, so I think Commissioner Look's question, I want to speak for him, but he said, was this precedential? If we leave a little bit of money in this project, I know we've done that before, but we have chosen not to do it before too. And I don't think it involves any sort of precedent. I think they're handled on a one-off basis. We'd have to make those decisions here at the TAB using our judgment. So
Mr. Chair, may I go ahead and move
Yeah.
this item?
Commissioner, please.
I'd like to move this item.
All right. Second from Member Lindeke. All right. We've got a motion and a second on 2022-19. Commissioner Gattel and Member Lindeke moving and seconding. Any further discussion?
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
I just, if there's some concern about whether something is precedent, my question would be, do we have guidelines that we look at for determining whether we're going to leave the money with the entity or return it? And if not, maybe that would be something we'd want to look at so that we have that framework when we're making a decision as a body on whether we're going to leave it or move it out. And maybe we do have those guidelines, but if not, I'd suggest maybe
good thought.
we develop those. Thank you.
Chair Solberg.
I believe Elaine may have some comments to that, Mr. Chair.
This did come up for discussion at TAC of whether to, in the past, we have had some that were approved when there's small amount of dollars because the amount to the staff time to reallocate that small amount was cost more than actually keeping that dollars in the project. And if the funding is not spent, it does come back to the region anyway. And then TAC did discuss is possibly setting up a policy as part of the scope change policy if there's a minor amount, could that be decided administratively? Right now, with the scope change policy, we have 3 levels of scope change. There's administrative, which MnDOT does on its own, because there's such very minor technical changes. There's informal, which MnDOT State Aid, myself, and one of our transportation planners review them, and we administratively, informally approve them, because they're minor, such as changing an overpass to an underpass. The project scope technically isn't changing by what it does, so we will approve those informally, so those don't come through TAB. And only the formal changes do. This one became formal because there was a cost change, even though it was a minor. And so TAC's executive was going to start discussing whether we add something to the scope change policy when it's a small percent and the scope is being completed, because in this case, the DNR is doing the work with local funds. So it's just a shifting of the funding and whether that could go through informally.
Well, I think it's a good policy to look at, because one, it'll define it for you, and then if it's obviously something where it's going to cost more if you to do it, it makes sense, but it also addresses Commissioner Look's concern of each time do we have to decide is this setting precedent or not, so thank you.
Yeah, that was a good suggestion, Member Stevens.
Thank you.
The other thing I was wondering is maybe we should have an opinion from legal counsel for the Met Council that these aren't precedent-setting situations. I mean, we're assuming that they're not because a lot of us are involved in local government. We see these one-off situations. and they're not precedent setting, but it would be nice to have the comfort of a legal decision, I guess, as to whether it is or is not. But still, with respect to the guidance, you know, I don't know if I'm comfortable with the idea that some of these decisions are made administratively. I think that's why we're here, to make these decisions. So I think it is good that if you're going to ask the tab exec to take this up as a project and then come back to the full tab with some suggestions on how we provide those guidelines, I think that's good policy. So, Commissioner Karwoski?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I agree with the comments made. And I do think that every dollar is a tax dollar and is very important. So I think just to pass it off that you're going to include it in the project, I think every dollar is important and we should review it.
Yeah. All right. Other thoughts on this topic? Nice to know it's going to tab exec. Thanks for that, Elaine. All right, we've got a motion and a second on 2022-19. Any further discussion?
Mr. Chair,
Yes, Commissioner?
just a quick comment. I know that all of us have projects that are pending and all of us have increased costs, you know, to these projects due to the, you know, inflation out there and timeframes and everything else that's driving up costs. So I'm not sure that a decision really should be based on, you know, everyone's costs going up. Obviously, everyone's cost is going up, and that's inherent to whether you want to continue this project or not, or return those funds. But I guess even though it's a small amount, I mean, I know it's probably, I don't know what the total project cost is, but it's probably a very small percentage of the total project cost. Even though it's that, I still feel, you know, that by justifying the small amount, we'll justify the larger amount at some point later.
Which would promote the notion of having some guidelines.
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right.
To
Commissioner
clarify,
Karwoski?
because this came up suddenly, I'll support this today, but I would like moving forward to have a policy.
All right. Yes, Member Foster?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Can people lean into their microphones or speak up? It's hard to hear folks.
Oh, I didn't.
Could you say that again, please?
That's a very good point. Can people lean into their microphone or speak up? It's hard to hear.
No, I understand why people thought it was a good joke. Thank you.
Glad to provide some humor to the room.
Mr. Chair.
Member Geisler?
Just as a counterpoint, you know, I think policying everything and proceduraling everything removes the ability to us to have judgment, which is the entire point of why we're here. Otherwise, you could just send it through a robot machine and it's all done. At some point here, I think, as Chair Solberg mentioned, our general approach has always been, if all the stuff in the project is still getting done and they're below the other required thresholds that are already out there, we leave the dollars alone. If they remove aspects of the project that are not being completed by anybody, associated project, nearby project, or anything, we tend to take the dollars back. That's been pretty consistent in all my years here so far. I've seen us follow through that pretty consistently. I think if we want to have a little more clarity on that, I think that's worth exploring. But I don't think we're out of bounds in saying we're doing something totally different than what we've been doing for at least the last 6 years that I've been watching meetings occur.
Yeah, we've made these decisions from time to time in the past, so. All right. Any further observations, comments? We've got a motion and a second on 2022-19 in front of us. All those in favor of adoption of the action item 2022-19 as stated, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Carried. All right, now we are on to 2022-15.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair. So again, 2022-15 is about the I-94 freight improvement project out in Woodbury and Oakdale. So this is a project that was included in the TPP amendment that came before this body, I believe, back in March, and now is back in front of you as it required a public comment period. And so with that, I believe Steve is going to present some of the results of the public comment.
All right, thank you.
Sure, thank you, Mr. Chair, and good to see everyone again. So we did receive 21 comments on this public comment period for this project. 14 of those were opposed to the project, and maybe just to give you a flavor for those types of comments, they were general comments related to highway mobility and greenhouse gas emissions, preference to shift the money to bike and ped, preference for lane reductions, et cetera. One thing we did note, and we try to make a comment to each of the comment themes that came in, we do have a pretty good handle on the criteria pollutants, carbon monoxide, PM 2.5, et cetera. We don't as much on greenhouse gases, and that's why we're doing a study starting this summer called the Regional Transportation and Climate Change Multimodal Measures effort. That's a mouthful right there. That's going to dig in more at the project level on what the impacts are of CO2 emissions from different types of transportation improvements. So that's something we're kicking off this summer. So 6 comments in support of the TIP amendment, including the 2 cities abutting the project, Oakdale and Woodbury. The MFAC, Minnesota Freight Advisory Committee, St. Paul Port Authority, Washington County, and MnDOT Freight Office were the 6 commenters there. And 1 comment did not state a position, but did mention about the freeway speeds. And so we did respond to speeds there too. So to sum it up here, let me go back to page 2. So again, this is kind of the last step in the approval process, and council is recommending that you do approve this TIP amendment and accept the public comments. There's a few reasons why, and we tried to lay those out in bullet points on page 2 and 3 of the action item for supporting this project. First bullet point, Met Council wrote a letter of support for the project, and it was the highest scoring freight project in the entire state. There was a lot of public outreach completed as part of the actual project itself, and in talking to MnDOT, they didn't receive any negative comments, just support for making improvements in this project area. Again, this is around the 694, 494, 94 interchange area. People are living through the project right now. It's actually started. The larger project from the Ramsey County border out to Hudson's already began, and this is a smaller project within that. On the second page, that the freight project was found to be consistent with the TPP, the goals, objectives, and strategies of the TPP, and this body saw that back in February. The council approved it on March 9th. The project was funded out of National Highway Freight Program, so it has very specific freight requirements and eligibility, so it's not easy to flip it to just a different project type. And lastly, the freight project did have substantial safety benefits, expected to reduce crashes by 15 to 25%. So this is a freight project that also had mobility benefits, a freight project that also had safety benefits. So the comments are also valuable that were in opposition to this project. There was a general concern with highway mobility, but not specific concerns with this specific project location. And what we're recommending here is that these comments are brought forward to other processes that are coming up in the short term. One of those being the regional solicitation, where the project and the dollars are very flexible, that you can shift between highways, transit, bike ped. Also, the TPP is going to take a hard look at highway mobility investments and our philosophy there. And so those are, we think the general comments that were received here fit better in those processes which are coming up in the next few months here. So, John, anything else from you? Okay, with that, I think, Mr. Chair, we'll turn it back to you, and do want to thank, again, the 21 commenters that did make comments here, and appreciate that. So, thank you.
Questions for Steve Peterson? Comments, Member Lindeke?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So later in the agenda today, we're going to be hearing about climate change action in the framework from the MPCA, and I'm looking forward to that. I did sneak preview the PowerPoint a little bit.
Yeah.
And, we've been talking about climate change for a long time here, and, as we should. I'm just interested in this response about one of the comments where it says here, the first one, it's unknown whether greenhouse gas emissions will increase or decrease due to the project. And, by my math, this is a mile of adding a lane to a highway. So if we're not at the point where we can say that expanding a highway isn't going to increase emissions, I think it's a little depressing for me, because reducing travel is the goal that we're gonna be talking about later in this meeting. So, is that really the situation where we can't say whether this is gonna increase greenhouse gas emissions?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair and Mr. Lindicky. It's a great question and certainly a void that we probably have in our highway planning process at the moment. What we could draw from, at least from the staff perspective, is looking at all the MnDOT analysis and the 2-year study that they did. And from that, you know, they did determine that the criteria pollutants, as I mentioned, were gonna be decreased from the project, but they didn't evaluate the greenhouse gases, and that's, I think, exactly why we need to look more into that topic. But for us to say one or the other, I think was probably inappropriate from the staff perspective.
All right.
Other questions or comments? Yeah, Member Narayana?
Chair. Oh, was somebody else call?
Member Narayana first, and then Commissioner Karwoski.
Thank you, Steve. So do you think that the study that you're doing now to understand the greenhouse gas emissions from highways will be able to answer a question like this definitively? Because, you know, I think the science is pretty clear, and we can draw on many different, you know, research papers to actually just say what Member Lindicky was saying. But do you think that, when do you think the study will be done, and when do you think we can have such an answer to a question?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair and Member Narian. And so the study will start, RFP will be on the street for a consultant probably this month or next month. Most of them are 12 to 18 month studies. Results hopefully will be, there's a few outputs of the study that I think are interesting to note. One is going to be the next regional solicitation cycle. So one potential outcome is a measurement tool in the solicitation to evaluate at a project level. And then the second is the TPP, where we'll bring these results into the update of the TPP. So that writing will take place of the TPP next in 2023. So there's 2 outcomes in 2023 where I think you'll see the study.
Commissioner Karwoski?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm familiar with this area, and you know, one way to eliminate greenhouse gases is not have people standing in traffic. So this will improve the flow of traffic.
Not true.
It's a safety. We do have a transit project that in 25 will be operational. That should drive down the need for cars. But I think we have to support cars when we don't have an alternative to that. You know, it's the highest freight project. I sat in on the real reason I wanted the biggest reason I wanted to speak, I sat in on a MnDOT meeting, public meeting on this last Friday. There were like 50, mainly residents. There wasn't anybody not supporting it. MnDOT reviewed, it's through 2024, all the way to Hudson River. Yep. Just makes total sense to do this lane addition as part of a bigger project. So I fully support it, and I think the free flow of traffic is a positive thing regarding our environment, and cars standing in traffic is an issue in my mind.
Commissioner Look?
Mr. Chair, based on William Gardner, who's the MnDOT Office of Freight and Commercial Vehicle Operations, stating that the project is a particular benefit to regional and statewide freight movements, I'll move it.
I'll second.
All right, we've got a motion by Commissioner Look and a second by Member Stevens to adopt the, on 2022-25, to adopt the public comment and recommend adoption of the amendment to the 2022-25 TIP to add the project funding a new auxiliary lane from I-494, 694, 94 in Oakdale to Washington County, Highway 19 in Woodbury, identified it as SP Special Project 8282-132F. Any further discussion? Member Stevens?
Mr. Chair, I'll just add my comments as well, having been city council member and mayor of Woodbury and having lived in that area for 38 years, that this corridor really is one of the major freight corridors for our state to run through other states. It runs east-west on 94. And this project will add both safety improvements, mobility improvements, and I agree, it will, it's not only cars that'll stop by, like, it's the freight that comes through, and it's a lot of freight. And they've done some, safety improvements over the years to that interchange because they've had such a high incident of truck rollers. So this just, again, one small piece of a bigger project, but I think benefits in a lot of ways. Hopefully, to Commissioner Linda Key's point, hopefully it helps improve the greenhouse gas emissions, not decreases it. And, there wasn't a study on that, but I think overall this project is extremely beneficial for the region. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Member Martinson?
Thank you, Chair Hovland. I'm going to speak out against this because I think that one of the things that was not discussed in any of the comments from the public and apparently wasn't appraised by the technical committee was what adding lanes of traffic does to vehicle miles traveled eventually. In case after case throughout this country for the last 50 or 60 years, we have looked to lane additions as a way of solving perceptions of congestion in transit and transportation. And it works as well for doing that as adding holes to your belt loop adds to reducing your weight. It doesn't work in the long run. It ultimately leads to more vehicle miles traveled in an era of climate collapse when we need to be reducing vehicle miles traveled through the principle of induced demand, which we discussed, I believe, in March. I believe we discussed in April, and we'll discuss again in the future. So I'll be voting against it, and I want to encourage my colleagues to do so as well.
All right, thank you, Member Martinson. Member Dugan?
Yeah, thank you. I fully understand Member Martinson's comments. I was, as a frequent user of that area, my profession, I'm on the road constantly. To me, there is environmental concerns, but the safety. When you come around, if there's a truck next to you, you've got no place to go. It's pretty dangerous. It's like I-35W and 494. The lanes at high speed come together so quickly, and the truck coming around a blind bend, and for the trucks it's hard. And then if you, again, from a pure safety standpoint, it's, in my opinion, it's absolutely necessary. As a user of it, and just practically speaking.
Member Lindeke.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair, and I respect the comment. I just wonder if this is a truck-only lane or if it's anyone can drive in it. And I know the answer already. It's a facetious question because I think if we're talking about highway expansions, we should be seriously talking about the climate impacts going forward. We're thinking long-term here, and around the country, freeway expansions are under increased scrutiny for obvious reasons having to do with all the climate collapse, and we're not making these things up. There's examples in Texas, in Washington, and Oregon, and other places where DOTs come to the community with a highway expansion project, and there's been a lot of different kind of conversation about the long-term climate impacts of those kinds of efforts. And I think we need to start having that conversation here around this. Instead of talking about freight, we should be talking about, do we want to expand highways right now? And so I support my colleague, Mr. Martinson, here, and not wanting to kind of shield our larger conversation about transportation and climate action by talking about trucks, because I respect the safety concerns, but this isn't a truck-only issue to me.
Member Hollinshead?
I support the remarks of Member Martinson, and I'm going to vote against this. I think there are different kinds of safety. There's safety on the highway in a moving vehicle, but there's also safety when you don't have to breathe dirty air and you don't live in a society where everyone has to drive and pollute in order to get anywhere. That fits within my definition of safety, and I hope to see that it will fit within the broader definition of safety in decisions by this and other bodies that are relevant to the issue. So I plan to vote against this as well. Thank you.
Member Schember?
I appreciate the comments from both sides, but it seems like we've scored this project. It was one of the highest scoring projects that was out there, and that if we want to have the debate about safety versus climate and climate safety, that we would change the scoring system so that projects would show up differently in the final. I don't like trying to have this debate on a project-by-project basis for 1 mile of lane expansion. I don't think that's productive.
Member Geisler?
Mr. Chair, thank you. You know, as someone whose day job is living in supply chain and working with manufacturing, freight bottlenecks are real. We can't pretend they don't exist. If you have heard anything about supply chain disruption that's going on in the last 2 years, some of that is supply, some of that is throughput, some of that, and it all matters. It's really hard to fit 50,000 pounds of stuff on a bicycle or a transit. And you need that last mile to get into the cities. I wholly respect that, you know, we do need to focus on adjusting our climate impacts, and that's why we have all these other areas that we're focused on and driving into. I think we do that. But this is a freight project. This is the intent of this project. It was reviewed under a freight scope. That was what it was for. These are freight dollars. There's a reason why we have separate buckets for everything to go in. And I am glad to see that there are safety aspects here. There is also a noise wall going in here, which is an environmental impact that they're mitigating to help the nearby communities. So that is still an environmental impact. It's just not greenhouse gas. So I think this is a good idea and it's a good project. Is it ideal? No. Does it check every single box? No. I don't know that we've seen a project that checks every single box. We have, no matter what category it's in. So I'm happy to support this because freight in and out of the metro and across our neighboring states does matter to the region, does matter to citizens as a whole.
Commissioner?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. As I'm listening to the comments and conversation, I appreciate the issue around freight. This is the same area in which we're building a gold line that is going to reduce the number of vehicles on the road, which will therefore allow for the congestion of freight vehicles already on existing road rates. So since we're investing in a gold line transit in the same area, I don't see why we should have to add additional lanes. And that maybe the problem here is that we do look at things in buckets and that we're not looking at a holistic picture, which I have concerns. And I'm going to agree with Member Schomburg is that maybe we need to take a step back and look at the policy and make a clear picture on scoring in a different way so that we are looking at a holistic picture and not just things in buckets. So this might be a freight project and meet those buckets. Unfortunately, it's a bucket that's filling over and I'm gonna vote no.
Member Narian?
Mr. Chair, I really like the idea that the member brought up again about changing the scoring and specifically making greenhouse gas emissions one of the top categories in which we score. So I was curious, how we would go about doing that.
Mr. Chair? Yeah, so if I can, those freight projects were selected by the state. TAB did not select those. So it would be at MnDOT's discretion, and I think simply having this conversation and then informing MnDOT, which I'm a part of, is the first way to start with it. And then clearly, as this moves forward, another thing to remember is in IIJA, it was one of the few areas freight did not receive additional funds, much like many of the other areas. So I think at the federal level, there is some different thoughts about what it is. It didn't necessarily take away, but it didn't add. But I can certainly bring these comments back to MnDOT and the office that does the solicitation on it.
Thank you, Ms. Stolpen. So would you be willing to kind of report back at the next meeting how the conversations went and if there are any next steps being taken?
I can certainly report back, Mr. Chair. Board Member Narian, and I don't know if it'll take place in the next month, but when I get word back, I can report out. Still the TAC chair, so I can report.
Thank you so much.
Member Hollinshead?
Can I request a roll call on this vote?
You can. I was thinking we'd do that anyway, so thanks for the reinforcement. All right. Any further conversation, further comment? Member Martinson?
To Member Narayan's question, is this question of how we do the scoring, is that something that will come up in the discussion later today of the TPP, possibly?
No.
No.
It would come up in conjunction with our regional solicitation, and then because this is a MnDOT project, this is really their jurisdiction with their money.
Got it. Thank you.
So when we go to the next phase of the regional solicitation, as we always do, looking at how we want to score out particular project areas, whether it's roads, bridges, transit, non-motorized, then we can Then we can have that discussion.
Thank you.
All right. Okay, I think we're done with all the comments, all excellent comments. We've got a motion and a second to adopt action item 2022-15. All those in favor, please raise your hands now. Did it count? Did you count?
16.
Okay, all right. Opposed? Please raise your hands. All right, very good, thanks. The ayes, the favorables have it, the 2022-15 is adopted. Just a reminder for everybody that when you think about our authority, our responsibility regarding freight's one of the measures included in the regional solicitation roadway applications category. And TAB can and has in the past prioritized funding for freight projects, but it's certainly discretionary. And so we can take that up around the next regional solicitation. But keep in mind the importance of freight to the region as well, because MnDOT appoints a TAB member for freight, and in this case, it happens to be Mr. Schember. And so mobility in freight is important, just as mobility is important relative to people as well. So it's a comprehensive weaving that we're engaged in, the work that we do around moving people and moving goods. And it'll be some interesting times ahead. I think we all recognize, all of us that are involved in climate work, and I think everybody in this room is involved in climate action work, that transportation is one of the biggest, if not the biggest offender in terms of greenhouse gas production, along with buildings. And certainly we got to try to figure out some way to do something about it, but keep in mind that we've got a broad range of responsibilities here as we serve the region. And it's, yeah, so, all right, thanks. We're on now to the next one, which is 2022-26.
Mr. Chair, item number 22-23.
23,
related to the 23
Related
to
to the
26
2026 tip. 2022-23, thank you.
All right, Mr. Chair, I'll just, again, briefly introduce this. Joe will be providing an overview, but again, this is a motion. The motion in front of the board would be for the Transportation Advisory Board to release the 23 to 26 Transportation Improvement Program for public comment. And I know Joe has a couple words he'd like to provide to the council.
All right.
Thanks, Chair Solberg. I haven't done this in a while. It works. So,
You can sense we're all kind of feeling our way again as we meet in person.
I wasn't sure if this would pop up, but it did.
First, we were feeling our way in the virtual world. We got pretty good at that. Now we're back
I'm better at it.
to our
So yeah,
former
as
method.
Chair Solberg said, what we're looking for today is a release of the tip for public comment. This is something that you used to do after it went to funding and programming and TAC in May and June, and then you would release it in June. But about 3 years ago, we had 210 public comments, and that changed our approach because we only had about 5 days to put those comments together for you. And some people got really burned out doing that. So we're releasing that today in May, and I'll talk a little bit about what the tip is. Those of you who have been around have seen presentations similar to this before, so I'm gonna not necessarily spend a lot of time, but feel free to stop me with questions, particularly if you haven't been through this before. So a lot of you probably know this. The TIP is a 4-year list of transportation projects that's funded in whole or in part with federal funding. Along with federally funded projects, you have to have projects that affect air quality. They're considered regionally significant, and there are a handful of those that might not have federal funding that are regionally significant. And every MPO in the country does this, and then what we do with the TIP after it's approved is we provide it to the state DOT, who puts it in their State Transportation Improvement Program, or STIP. And in order to be, for money to come from the feds to the projects have to be in the STIP. So here's our schedule. It's pretty much mirrors last year, except for each of these dates is shifted by about 1 day. There's gonna be a public, a virtual public meeting on June 21st. We had that last year. We had about 20 people there, although only one person commented. Otherwise, you see the schedule just like last time. You'll see this in August.
for your approval of the final tip, and then it goes on to the council and, of course, to MnDOT and the USDOT. So here's a 4-year summary of what you see. It doesn't look too different from last year. It's a little higher. I think last year was about 5.2 billion for that table on the left. A little bit higher in the top 3 bullets than last year. And then by mode, this mirrors what you've seen in the past. Actually, transit has usually been over 50%, so it's just a hair under 50% now. Other set-asides and TDM might be up a little bit. Set-asides tend to be projects that are maintenance type of things that we don't know the location at yet, but will come up as needed. And that's really all I have. It's quick. There's 512 some projects in there. Let me know if you have any questions about the tip or about the process.
Any members have questions for Mr. Barbeau? Member Martinson?
Yeah, there's a lot of material there, but in looking through it, one of the things that I did not see, last month, I believe it was, we heard a presentation from Mark Doctor, PE of the Federal Highway Administration, I believe, who was presenting to us on the safe systems approach that is being adopted and propagated by our Federal Highway Administration and elsewhere around the world from where they're getting it. And I didn't see any mention of anything like a safe systems approach in this. And I'm wondering if that is something that was just an oversight, or is that something that is so new on the horizon that it just isn't being baked into our planning going forward just yet?
I mean, it's closer to the latter. It wasn't an oversight, yeah. Nothing related to the safe systems approach has gone into the project selection for the tip. So we'll see how that evolves going ahead. There certainly are safety rationale into project selection, both at MnDOT and with regional solicitation. So we'll see how if that more directly comes in. I won't promise it at this point, but that would be a little new for that to have happened this time.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions for Mr. Barbeau? All right, Mr. Barbeau would like us to authorize the release of the draft TIP program for 2023 through 2026 to the public for public comment. Is there a motion to that effect?
Mr. Chair, I so move.
All right. Commissioner Guttel moves, Mayor Winshuttle seconds. The adoption of 2022 what is it? 23? All right. Any further discussion? All those in favor of the adoption of action transmittal 2022-23 say aye. Aye. Opposed? Carried. Now we're going to move on to the information portion of the agenda, and a couple of our members have alluded to the eagerness to hear the Minnesota Climate Action Framework report out from the MPCA, and we've got Amanda Jarrett-Smith with us today, who's going to provide that presentation to us, and it will be interesting. Ms. Jarrett, welcome. Jarrett-Smith, welcome.
Hello, thanks for having me. I am not sure what to do to get my presentation.
Greg will pull it up. Yep.
Oh, okay. Magic. Thank you. Thank you all for having me. I'm Amanda Jarrett-Smith. I'm the Climate Unit Supervisor at the Pollution Control Agency. And this is probably the first presentation I've done in person in 2 years, so I hope I remember how to do it. So far, the technology seems to be working. So I've been asked.
You're in a tolerant, supportive crowd.
All right, excellent. And can y'all hear me pretty well?
Yeah.
All right. It's nice to see actual human faces rather than just screens, so I'm appreciating that. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about our climate action framework that we've been developing. The development process is being led by the Climate Change Subcabinet, which was developed by Governor Walz's Executive Order 1937 on climate change, and brings together the heads of 15 agencies, departments, and boards to work on climate change, both reducing greenhouse gas emissions and developing resiliency across all of state government. Met Council is a part of that. And we're also working closely with the Governor's Advisory Council on Climate Change, which was also established as part of that executive order. So just why a climate action framework? The thinking behind this is that we heard from a lot of folks, both within state government and outside of state government, that they really wanted to have a clearer statement of what we were trying to accomplish together on climate change. So the framework helps us organize our work and our thinking, and then share that thinking with Minnesotans and invite conversation about that thinking. So hearing what people's priorities are, we published a draft, and then we're going to use that input that we're getting on the draft to kind of build the final copy together. And then we're also hoping that the framework will eventually serve as a tool for accountability, where we'll be able to review and update it and report out on what we've accomplished together and what we still have yet to do. And then finally, we're hoping that the framework will serve as a catalyst for action across all sectors, because ultimately that's what we're trying to achieve. That state agencies and the advisory council can't do it alone. We need partners, and so we're trying to craft a document that people will see themselves in, and we'll see how their work can help drive towards that vision. So a little bit about process. We published some initial concepts last summer and got input on that. Those concepts were based on past engagement, past analysis, and we got input throughout the summer and fall. We published a draft of the document this winter and had a series of work group meetings, public input process, meetings with our tribal partners this winter and spring. Right now, we're in the process of compiling all that, reviewing it, thinking about how it might contribute to edits to the final document. The advisory council and the subcabinet will be reviewing that input this summer, and we're hoping to, planning to publish the final, later this summer. And so I want to emphasize that all the content that I talk about here today is very much draft and does not reflect the input that we've been getting. So I would encourage, if this group wants to hear more about the framework once it's final, I'd encourage perhaps the invitation of MnDOT to come in and talk more about the details of the transportation sector in the framework, but I'll hit the highlights today. So what is the Climate Action Framework? I think of it as accomplishing three things, essentially. The first is setting a vision for how Minnesota will address and prepare for climate change, then broadly describing the work that we need to do to accomplish that vision, and then narrows into identifying immediate near-term actions that would support those long-term goals. And I think that last piece is pretty important in terms of what you'll find in the framework. It doesn't outline every single thing that we need to do to address climate change and build resiliency in the state, but rather identifies those near-term things that will lay a strong foundation for eventually accomplishing those long-term goals. So the vision that the framework outlines is for a Minnesota that is carbon neutral, resilient, and equitable. And again, the work outlined in the framework will lay that foundation that will help us to move towards that long-term vision. The framework has 6 goal chapters. You can see those on the slide. Within each of those goal chapters, we talk about certain key themes around things like with challenge comes opportunity. So climate change is obviously a major challenge facing our state, but at the same time as we work to address that, we have opportunities to build a cleaner future, a healthier future, and a more robust economy for Minnesota. We also talk about equity throughout the document, and that, again, we all have a role to play, that it's not just state government, but we all need partnerships in order to achieve these goals. And then we talk a bit about co-benefits, kind of related again to the with challenge comes opportunity. We want to work on climate and also achieve a more equitable Minnesota, a Minnesota with cleaner air, cleaner water, cleaner lands, and a more robust economy. And so I want to talk a little bit specifically about climate equity because that is such an important part of our work. It's important for us to remember and acknowledge that the impacts of climate change are not experienced equally by Minnesotans across the state, and that climate change is yet another lens in which inequities are being laid bare and which demands critical and immediate action if we want to be a state where all Minnesotans can thrive and not just some. And so those, those who are already vulnerable due to a range of social, economic, historical, and political factors are also less capable of preparing for, coping with, and recovering from climate change impacts. and are also often on the front lines of climate change impacts, whether it's flooding, heat, or access to fish and wildlife for subsistence. And so this is kind of a really critical part of the climate change executive order. It's also a cornerstone of the framework and of our climate work more broadly. So now I'm going to shift a little bit from talking about the framework more generally to talk more about the clean transportation portion. Again, emphasizing that it's draft and that it was brought together by a team of interagency staff and leadership led by MnDOT. And so, again, I'm kind of hitting the highlights, but if you want details, I would encourage a visit from our MnDOT colleagues. So within each of the chapters, we have measures of progress that will help us identify whether or not we're on track to meet our long-term goals. So within transportation, we have 3 that are, one is around reducing greenhouse gas emissions from transportation in line with the Next Generation Energy Act. There's kind of a placeholder right now around reducing vehicle miles traveled. MnDOT has a process going on right now to identify a VMT reduction goal, and so that will be brought into the framework later. And then a goal around increasing EV adoption, which is in line with past goals that we've stated as a state. The framework is organized. Each goal chapter has initiatives that identify the actions that are needed to reduce emissions within that sector. Transportation has 2. The first is connected communities, and the second being clean and efficient vehicles. Connected communities is about maintaining and improving multimodal options for Minnesotans. And so within that, you'll see information around infrastructure for multimodal transportation, land use planning, education to support that infrastructure, broadband, and then some technical considerations around material use and things in terms of construction. And then the second initiative, being clean and efficient vehicles, is more related again to the vehicles and fuels. So we have content in there around planning for electric vehicles and biofuels, expanding electric vehicle infrastructure, increasing availability of electric vehicles and reducing cost of them, educating potential EV owners and dealers, as well as developing a clean transportation workforce in collaboration with trade schools and colleges, and then advancing vehicle efficiency and fuel economy standards and emission standards in partnership with other states and the federal government. And then within kind of narrowing to those specific actions, there's a whole table of actions within the framework, but each chapter identifies some priorities. And within this, I think you'll see some that definitely relate to the work of TAB, including more funding for non-motorized transportation and evaluating current funding priorities to direct more resources towards non-motorized transportation. Increasing transit service to create more reliable and convenient transit networks, with particular priority given to communities that are transit reliant and are disproportionately impacted by air pollution. And then promoting more transportation options in the land use planning that supports those multimodal transportation options, developing clean fuel standard, and then a variety of things around electric vehicles, but particularly with regards to charging, planning, statewide and regional planning related to electric vehicles. And so with that, that's where you can find the full framework and all the other content areas. I'd be happy to answer questions or have some conversation.
Thank you for that presentation. Yes, the hands are starting to shoot up. Commissioner, go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Just out of curiosity, who was involved in the kind of the planning of this? Are there members from MnDOT and other agencies that are actively involved in the planning, or is this your agency and you're going to tell them what to do? I mean,
no, it's very much
work?
excuse me, Mr. Chair, member. It's very much a collaborative effort. So the subcabinet brings together the 15 different agencies, boards, and departments, and then within that we have kind of what I jokingly refer to as a bureaucracy within a bureaucracy, but we have a group of senior leaders from each of those agencies that meets regularly and guides the work of this. And then within that, we have what we call action teams that are interagency staff and leadership on each of the topic areas. So each of those goal chapters has a group of staff and leaders that are guiding that across an interagency team.
If I may
Commissioner,
follow-
go ahead.
If I may just follow up then, and where then is community involved in that planning process?
So, Commissioner, Chair, Member, excuse me, again, it's been a while since we've done some of this, but, so we had a stakeholder process. We also had kind of more of a public-facing input process. One of the things that we did here was that we needed to do more public input, and that's something that I very much agree with. So as we're thinking about next steps, we're definitely thinking about what is that long-term engagement plan. And as any of these, the document is a framework, and any of those actions is going to require additional input and process to actually implement and develop. And so there is also going to certainly be engagement related to any of the development and implementation of any of the recommendations within the framework.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, go ahead. Member Geisler.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much for the presentation. Always great to see these coming out in frameworks. I have kind of maybe a little off-the-wall question here, but at what point are we going to say and realize the transportation infrastructure and our power infrastructure are now completely commingled and they are one and the same? And I asked that question a little bit in the sense that my home solar system now made 37 megawatts, which is enough to drive an EV 100,000 miles in 3.5 years. So distributed electrical systems, large-scale electrical systems, EV is a cornerstone of how we're going to achieve a lot of these things. And especially in the framework sense, which is big, broad scope, trying to figure out how all these interlace with each other. At what point is the PUC going to start talking to MnDOT about how we're going to achieve this in a more tighter way, all as one and not as separate agencies with different goals?
Great question, Chair, Member. I think that's part of the intent of the Governor's executive order and the work that we're doing is these cross-agency teams, is to bring those agencies closer together so that we're not just working in our own swim lanes. So now with this the system that we have, MnDOT and Commerce are meeting weekly about these issues. And so we're trying to work more collaboratively together to make sure that we are intersecting those different issues. It's, of course, challenging. We all have our own funding pots and regulatory authorities, but we're trying to make sure that those things are starting to come together in a more cohesive way.
Member Lewis.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I had a question about slide 8 pertaining to the measures of progress. Are those binding for and by MBCA? Are those recommended to us to put into place? Could you just speak to the accountability measure?
Great question. The framework is not a statutorily directed thing, so I guess the accountability is us holding ourselves accountable to the public and to ourselves right now. There isn't a built-in accountability measure because of the kind of source of the authority.
Member Lindeke.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a clarifying question on that same slide, so it's actually a good lead-in, but the reduced greenhouse gases in transportation 30% by 2025, what's the baseline from what you're reducing? Where's the 30%, from when? And then it's only 3 years away, so do you have a sense of where we're at in terms of achieving that in 2022?
Yes, Chair, Member. That particular measure of progress is translated from the Next Generation Energy Act, which was is a statewide statute, and so that sets up goals for the state to achieve 30% emission reduction by 2025 across all sectors by 2025 from 2005 baseline, and then 80% by 2050. And so that particular goal translates that overarching societal goal down to the transportation sector. And so right now in the transportation sector, the last time, I don't have the number in front of me, but I believe our last measure was around 8% reduction from 2005 to 2018 would have been our last reporting, because there's a lag in the reporting.
Great, thanks.
Member Foster, then Commissioner Guttel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was wondering, how is this going to be rolled out to the different agencies? And is there an expectation of them using it even loosely as a guiding doc? Or?
Yes, Chair, member, that's a great question. Again, we're not, the PCA is not rolling it out to the other agencies because all the agencies were involved in its creation. That said, yes, we are planning to use this as a guiding document as we start to think about, budget requests and policy priorities going forward.
Thank you.
Commissioner Guttel.
Thank you. And my question probably follows up on that. It appears as if you had a pretty big table, but one of the things that I would implore you as you go back and look at this again is to look at the counties. The counties all are doing this kind of work. To look at the municipalities. We are working very coordinated campaigns with our municipalities, our cities, our park districts, everything. And that voice is not in this document here. And we're putting dollars toward things too. And you think about the dollars that are going to go on this, if we don't coordinate, there could be some pretty big misses or people going in different directions. So I'm really hopeful that if you really are going to go do another outreach, that you look at counties and municipalities as your next step.
Thank you for that input.
Member Hollinshead.
I'm trying to remember the slide. It said 20% electric vehicles. Is that the whole fleet or electric vehicle purchases by 2030?
Chair, member, that is for the whole fleet.
Okay. What was the derivation of that 20%?
That was an analysis that was done several years ago. The state agencies published the electric vehicle vision document for the state several years ago, and the analysis was to look at what would be the emissions reductions that we would need to achieve an interim target in 2030, and how would we be able to achieve that with electric vehicle adoption, and so that number was derived from that analysis.
Member Hollinshead, go ahead.
So that was some years ago. I think we've seen a curve become steeper on purchases of EVs. So is that figure going to be final, or is that going to be changed, reflecting the current market?
Chair, member, that is, we have received input that should perhaps be increased. We also have received input that that's an unreasonable goal based on the number of EVs we have in the fleet today. But that is, setting targets around electric vehicles is something that we have been talking a lot about between the state agencies, and I know it's also part of the conversation around MnDOT's statewide multimodal transportation plan. So I think that it's a bit of a moving target if that's the goal that we're going to stick with, or if we're going to set a different goal.
Member Anderson, go ahead.
Whew, I should definitely know that, but I'm not going to be able. Do you remember, Todd? It's around 1%.
Thank you.
What was that question again, Member Anderson?
What was where we're at now as far as percentage of electric vehicles?
Okay. Thank you. Member Burkhart.
Amanda, thanks for the presentation. Appreciate it. I'm not sure if it's an appropriate question around this framework, but in your ecosystem, is there discussion as to where the energy is going to come from, the electric? Is it all renewables, or is there a look at nuclear? Is there a discussion on that, and what's your opinion on nuclear versus renewables?
Chair, member, I'm not sure I'm going to express my personal opinion on that today, but yes, right now nuclear is an important part of the mix of our state fleet of power source, and that's a topic of hot debate at the PUC and Department of Commerce and the legislature and all sorts of places. We got a lot of comments from people who are supportive of expanding nuclear. Nuclear is very expensive and kind of unknown costs really for new nuclear. And our current nuclear fleet needs a lot of upgrades. That said, certainly expansion of renewables is a major part of it, but the topic of nuclear is hotly debated in Minnesota and elsewhere.
Thank you.
You know, I've been to several U.S. Conference of Mayors meetings in the past 6 months, and with the president having charged former Mayor Mitch Landrieu from New Orleans with implementing the Infrastructure Act, one of the things that's a repeated message is cities, counties, states, get your EV plans in place so that we can build this network from the ground up with that money that's being dedicated through the infrastructure bill to building out our electric vehicle capabilities. So as a city like I'm from thinks about this, is there assistance that we can get from the MPCA? Has the MPCA started to think about how we build out this EV infrastructure, city by city, county by county, and across the state so that we can be one of the first to receive funds?
Yes, Chair, that's an excellent question. So my agency, the PCA, has been spending funds, you may recall the Volkswagen settlement funds from several years ago. We're continuing to build out that network along highway corridors. The kind of first round of funding that's coming out of the federal government is around, again, highway corridors. All the funding related to electric vehicles is going to the state DOTs. So we're working very closely with the Department of Transportation to develop a plan for building out that infrastructure. That said, I do believe, and I think this is perhaps what you're alluding to, I do believe that there's opportunity to apply for additional funding beyond those corridors. That starts to get out of my my realm of knowing a lot of detail, but definitely the Department of Transportation is taking the lead on this work, and so I'd encourage connecting with them. And I'd be happy to tell you who the people are to connect with on that.
Maybe you could let Elaine know who
Absolutely.
who those folks are. And then Commissioner Ulrich.
Well, I just wonder on the data, you know, if we could ever get data on how friendly electrical vehicles really are to the environment. I'm reading right here that 71% of the electricity is generated by non-renewables, like 29% is renewable, and then 26 is nuclear, 25 is coal, and 20% is natural gas. So I mean, if only 29% comes from renewables, our electrical vehicles really as friendly to the environment as we think. I drive a hybrid, you know, that gets over 40 miles per gallon, but I kind of tend to think that's better than having 71% of an electric vehicle coming from non-renewables.
Member Geisler?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. To Commissioner Ulrich's comments, I mean, I make 62% of the power that I use every year off my roof. So it is very possible to make a material impact, and I started doing that in 2017. The technology's better, it's cheaper, it's easier to install, and it's only getting better as it's going forward. And we know that the puck is doing decarbonization of the utilities grid as we speak. You know, I think it's a legitimate question to ask overarchingly, are we going to be able to support this on a distribution network side? But I think we're really discounting the distributed production opportunities that we have from commercial buildings, from government buildings, from places that are effectively just asphalt roofs that are generating heat and otherwise disrupting climate in that space. That is just missed opportunity. That all of that pulls down overarching draw, which allows us to take off some of these aged facilities that are producing the power to drive our transportation structure, which is why I asked the question about how are we interlacing our transportation plans with our utility plans, because before they were, it only really mattered to get fuel to the plants. So that's the end of it. Now we're talking about our utilities driving our cars, essentially through power. So it is absolutely an achievable metric. We have lots of people doing it. There's lots of people who are totally free, even in this state. It's not, you know, it doesn't have to be a sunshine state to do it. So I hear those skeptical comments, but yet I'm driving a plug-in hybrid full-size SUV that's getting 100 miles to the gallon because I can drive most of my things on battery power because most of my trips are 3 miles or less. Grocery store, home, school, home, little trips like that. That kind of change will go a long way that citizens can take when they can, when they choose to, and that we can support.
Thanks for
Well,
the
if I
comment.
was, just a comment if I could, brief. If I was making those kind of trips, I would have a plug-in hybrid, but many of my trips are 200 miles one way.
Sure.
So.
Commissioner?
Yes, I appreciate this conversation. One of the things that we're doing in Ramsey and Washington County through our recycling and energy is we're about to do food scrap collection that will convert that food scrap to biogas that we potentially could fuel our fleet vehicles and city buses, Met Transit buses. I just returned from a trip from Sweden where they're 50% electric and 50% biofuel. There is actually a ton of, they have the same weather conditions, which is why we went to Sweden, and they said, actually, they have a problem with electric buses in the winter because they can't heat them on the inside, so they're buying like propane heaters to put inside the bus, as opposed to the biofuel, all made from household food scraps. And so we, of course, have invested in this technology. It'll be rolling out in Washington and Ramsey County in the next 2 years. But we have this, great opportunity to reduce the amount of trash in our waste stream by food waste, restaurants, households. Just think about all of that oil and grease and food scraps that can be turned directly to biofuel that can go into any of our diesel vehicles without even converting the diesel engine. So I want to just put that on your radar, so as you're making these goals and you're thinking about things you can do, is that you don't only focus on electric, that's a critical part, but there are other opportunities that even have bigger benefits overall to include revenue generation opportunities. And then the secondary feature of after processing the bio waste and compost actually produces hydrogen, which is really going to be the next energy source, and it all comes from our trash. So to make sure that you're thinking about that in your process.
Chair, may I respond to a couple
Go
of these
ahead.
items?
Yes.
Thank you. So I guess I'll start with that, and I appreciate you raising that specific program. Thank you. And I think sometimes when I think about transportation reductions especially, I think kind of first about is almost like reduce, reuse, recycle, right? So like reducing the amount that we're driving, and then a cleaner fuel, and so electricity, and then also certain biofuels as well. And so when we're thinking about those different uses, some things can be electrified pretty easily, like light-duty cars, the technology's there. Some of the things are going to be harder for us to electrify, the bigger trucks, and long-distance trucks and aviation fuel, that sort of thing. So I think that it is really important that we don't only think about electrification, although I think that it's going to be a very big part of the solution, but there are these other pieces, and I think that that's a really great example. To the question of the kind of relative cleanliness of electric vehicles, that it has been studied quite broadly, and with our mix of fuels on the grid today, we do know that electric vehicles are a cleaner option than a gas vehicle or a diesel vehicle, and it is, to the member's point, getting cleaner every day. We have plans in place that have been approved by the Public Utilities Commission to close the coal plants over coming years in the 2020s, and so we do know that our grid is going to continue to get cleaner and cleaner as we move forward into the next decade.
Good. Well, I'm going to thank you for being here today and hope you can come back. I would just add on to, I think, what Commissioner Gattell said, and that's an encouragement for your group to be looking at the county climate action frameworks. Cities like ours, even our size city, has a climate action framework that's been completed that we're feeling pretty good about, and trying to figure out how to meet those targets, those benchmarks, is going to be on us. And so it's on all of us. But you can see from this conversation today not only your presentation, but what before, that everybody in this room cares about what's happening on this planet and how to make sure that it's preserved and life is preserved appropriately here. So thanks for all the good work you're doing.
Mr.
Thank
Chair?
you, Chair.
Just a quick question
Sure.
before you go. So you spoke a little bit about funding that's going to be diverted, so to speak, to pay for some of these things. Where does that funding come from? Is it increased taxes, or is it being diverted from somewhere else, and where would that somewhere else be?
Chair and member, this framework doesn't have a specific funding associated with these different actions. They are things that it will feed into our budgeting process as we, make budget requests to the legislature. There is also funding coming in from the federal government, as we talked about with the electric vehicle funding. So this framework does not have specific money attached to it right now, but we will certainly be looking for opportunities to get funding for some of these various things.
Yeah, the reason I ask is we can operate in a fiscally constrained environment, where we have to identify kind of expenses for ideas that we have. And this sounds like it isn't constrained necessarily by funding as of yet.
No, that is not the purpose of the framework.
Thank you.
Good. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you so much.
Always a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you for having me, and thanks for the work that you do.
All right, I thought we'd roll right through this agenda today, but there's always rich conversation to be had, whether it's in person or online, more so in person, I think. We're going to do the transit onboard survey with Ashley, and then Cole Henniker just wants to make a quick comment about the TPP. We're going to hold that presentation over until our next meeting, but has one thing that he wants to cover relative to that before we adjourn. So we'll ask Ashley and Eric to come up and talk about the onboard survey.
Thank you, Chair, and so good to see you all. And I'm here with my colleague Eric Lind from Metro Transit Strategic Initiatives. And together we're going to present to you some of the results from the pilot survey of our transit onboard survey. And first, just a quick note, we sent you like the dissertation level packet of version of this presentation with about 25 slides. That's posted online on the agenda. We didn't realize we only had about 10 minutes to present, so we're giving you the very high level overview of just a few slides during this talk today. Wow, I did it. Okay. So very briefly, the onboard survey is a system-wide, not just on Metro Transit lines, the entire regional transit system. It's a system-wide survey of who's on transit, what kind of trips they're making, where they're going, and where they're coming from. And this is an intercept interview survey. The only reason I want to stress that on this slide is so that you know that this is a representative sample of people who are on board transit. We just can't get this information through voluntary pass-around pieces of papers type survey. We have to ride the buses and trains and randomly select people to get a really robust picture of who's actually on board. This is conducted every 5 years, and the last one we did was in 2016, so you can imagine that every transit agency is knocking on my door asking for data like this because so much has changed in the COVID era, and people really need this information to make good business decisions. It's also required that we have a robust survey from a federal level. They'll ask for these data when they're doing before and after studies, implementing new transit lines and the like. This pilot survey data that we're presenting to you is just a subset of the busy routes in the Metro Transit system. So there's 10 bus routes, the 2 BRT lines, and the 2 green lines. The full list is in your packet. Right, and before we get started with the results, I just want to talk about how, because it's sort of a subset of routes, how we're understanding these data, and then I'll turn it over to Eric to walk through some very brief results from the survey itself. basically, we're picturing the riders that we encountered in our survey last year, last fall, 2021, as a subset of the people and the trips that would have been onboard transit in 2016. So just imagining that, like, we've just kind of like filtered down the number and types of people that we're encountering onboard transit today. The information we'll be presenting to you only compares the routes that were sampled in both 2016 and 2021, and we can even do route-to-route comparisons, although the information we'll be presenting to you is more just across all the routes that we sampled. We have our full survey data coming 2023, so we're actually, if you've been riding transit, you've probably seen a surveyor or two out in their blue vest asking people about their trips. Does someone?
I said.
All right, cool, yes. All right, Member Foster. All right, and so with that in mind, another way we're understanding these data as in shorthand, if you will, is to think about what trips were lost and what trips were retained. So thinking of a retention rate and a loss rate of trips. In 2016, on all these routes that we sampled, there were 157,000 trips per day. Today, based on our counts, we're getting that 72,000 trips per day are now served by these routes. So less than half, or 46% of those trips were retained. So that's your baseline number, 46% retained. And then we're going to get into some details, some demographic and trip purpose details. Dr. Lind.
Thank you. So I'm Eric Lind, Manager of Research and Analytics at Metro Transit, and we're obviously one of the providers of transit in the region, but I really want to thank Ashley and the Met Council staff who have helped direct this survey, paid for this survey. It is really critical data for us at Metro Transit to just understand, as Ashley mentioned, truly who's on board in a way that we can't using any other method. And so, especially as we have been going through the last few years, the great disruption that have happened in the COVID era, it's become more important than ever to understand who's actually using our system. We know that there's 70 to 80 to right now about 120,000 trips happening on an average weekday on our system. Okay, there may be a big change in who that is compared to previous years, and that's what this data allows us to see. So I'm going to run through these in kind of a just statement fashion. We have more men on board during COVID, if you will. So last fall, we're up to 57% of the people on board identifying as men. And that's both a big departure from a 50-50 split, if you think about just gender equity, but also an increase from the past. So we've always had a slightly male bias in our ridership. When we look at the numbers this way, that has grown during COVID. We have a higher share of people who identify as having a disability using our system. So in 2016, on these routes, it was around 11%. Now it's about 18% of the trips that are happening are being made by people who say that they have a disability, and we ask. So that, 1 in 5 of the riders that we have. We have an increase in the share of riders who identify as Black, Indigenous, or people of color. That was already about 50-50 in 2016. It has grown to 55% on these routes in 2021. And we've retained a higher share of people with lower income in their household. So as you go kind of across the spectrum here, you see those dark blue bars going lower. That means we're retaining fewer of those trips. And even just looking at this and thinking, kind of foreshadowing the trip purpose that we're going to look at, we've retained a lot of lower income households and lost the middle to high income households who might have been using transit for more of an office commute instead of a wage job. Okay, so that gets us to the other important part of this survey. We asked people about their origin destination. And of course, we asked them about kind of what time and what kind of place it was. From these places, we can categorize trips, and we sort of bin their travel into different trip types. So this is what was going on these routes in 2016, and I do want to pause and just note that, again, thinking about messages you may have heard or your own sort of ideas about what was happening in transit prior to the pandemic. There's a lot of different trip types going on transit on a daily basis. It is not only a work commute or a school commute, although that's the most common type of trip, but there's work commutes that are happening not 9 to 5. There are a lot of people making errands, people doing social outings, people going to see the doctor. Obviously, people are going to the airport, people are going, out to eat. But this is what this looked like. So we had a very diverse set of trip purposes in 2016. If we look at how we retain those trip purposes, it's still pretty diverse, and it's still true that, if you add up work and school commutes, that's sort of the biggest bucket. But there was different retention based on these different types of trips. So more of the social trips were lost, more of those, airport trips were lost. The only category that we really retained almost completely was actually that errand category. So things like going to the grocery store, going to the pharmacist, basic life maintenance. Okay, this corresponds with what we have been thinking has been going on transit during COVID, which is people are using it to maintain their daily lives, right? Support themselves. Yes, going to work, yes, going to school, but also maintaining their just general routine. So what that looks like, if you kind of do in this fill bar way, as you can see from 2016 on the bottom to 2021 on the top, there's an expansion of that errands and shopping category in terms of the percentage of the total trip types on these routes. Okay, so we still have a near 50% that are doing work and school commutes, both peak commutes and also off-peak commutes, but there are the other diverse purposes that people are using transit for. You'll see also one of the other categories that grew during COVID was medical. So 6% from 4% in 2016. And again, those are people who are going to the hospital or going to the doctor for appointments, not for work. So overall, this is a really important finding for us because we need to build a transit system and run a transit system that supports all of these purposes. And that means running transit that's frequent enough that you can do an errand on it. It means running them both directions, if you will, in and out of downtowns, not just coming inbound in the morning, outbound in the PM. And of course, having that, the reach of that metro network that we're building where people can get around the region for any type of purpose. We can actually take that data and also break it out by time of day, and this kind of just emphasizes what I was saying, where in 2016, of course, we had a strong peak travel period, and this is general travel that you can look around, whether it's automobile or anything else, you'll see these AM and PM symmetrical peaks. We don't see that now on transit. We've been seeing a very flat increase through the day to kind of a higher PM activity, but certainly not as peaked as it used to be. But when you layer in the trip purposes, you can really start to see, as you compare left side and right side here, what pieces are missing to get us back to that original, height, if you will, of the number of people that have been using our system. And as you look through this, the conclusion is that it's not just the 9 to 5 office commuters that are missing. There are lots of other trip types. The social community aspect, people riding for, going out, whether it's an event or going to see friends or going, to church, those rides are not happening as often either, okay? So as we think about how to build back our ridership in this COVID era, we're gonna have to, again, consider lots of different trip types, as well as kind of the more obvious one, which is that peak office commute, which I know a lot of people are thinking about. So I think that was the speed run version of the results. There's a lot more detail in your packet, and I think we'll be happy to take questions.
Yeah.
All right, thanks, Eric. All right. In the corner, Member Foster, would you have that microphone passed down to you? It's hard to get the recording apparently done. So for those in the corner there, you need to share that portable microphone.
I feel like a rock star. Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is really cool. Thank you. I'm very excited about it, and I have lots of questions, and I will email some of them. Is there a way, how do you measure trips that were multi-type task? Like I took a trip, I went to work, came home from work, got downtown, went to Target, got lazy, took the bus down to the library. Like, how is that shown in here?
Thank you. And Chair Member Foster, that's a great question. So what we define as a trip is one of those legs of what you're calling a trip. So from the library to work, for example. And Eric and I, like when we categorize those trips, we're kind of ascribing half of the value to that library side and half of the value to the work side. So both sides of that one-way trip there are represented. Yeah, it does get a little more complicated and interesting, if I might add, when you start to string things together into what we call tours. So I think that's what you were describing, where you have multiple trips all linked together. One of the interesting findings from Los Angeles Metro, for example, is that women, relative to men, make more complicated tours throughout their day. So really making lots of stops, whereas men's tours tend to be a little bit simpler. It's something we'd like to analyze with these data.
Member Foster, I know you have more of that. All right, thank you. All right. Member Barber.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to compliment this work. I mean, Ashley and Eric and Jonathan have heard me say it many times. They do such a thorough job that you can really get a feel for what's going on. I think the other thing that's really fascinating, or will be fascinating about this, is we have the 2021 pilot data, but the actual survey is happening in 2022. As we know, no different than us here in the room, there's been more people returning to work, more people trying to readapt to whatever normal is now, and I think we're going to have a really fascinating before and after scenario to look at with this data. So I'm really glad that you were really thorough with this pilot study, because it's really going to be helpful to look at that 2022 data. So that's all I have.
Member or Commissioner Karwoski, and then Member Hollinshead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good presentation. I think it's really important to follow the data, but get accurate data, the more accurate, and that's easier said than done, I think, with transit. But I was wondering, and I wasn't looking at all the slides, but I think there was no mention of security. And I'd really like you to track security. As an example, I'm convinced that if people feel safe, the ridership will be increased. I think it's one of the biggest impediments to growing ridership is that whether it's perception or fact that people don't feel secure. Is that something you can add? And then they expound on that. I know we've got legislation. It's very important to our new line, the gold line, but it's important to any line out there. There's legislation to fund uniform type officers, kind of like a peace officer that can write tickets. If you could, and then the current security, I don't know if it's handled disproportionately, but I think if you could track whatever security we have on, officers, whatever, to the ridership, that'd be interesting. And even if you did that through screening people, like you mentioned the slide about the men ridership increasing to women decreasing, I bet you there's a security component to that. So the more you can tap into that. So any comments?
Yep. Mr. Lind or Ms. Rasmus?
Yeah, if I could, Chair and Member, you have identified pretty much the highest priority at our agency right now. So Metro Transit, as well as the Met Council itself, have been working very hard to identify what we can do to make it a safe and secure system, which is obviously our goal.
Yeah, because if you could track that, and we can make progress on security, and then you could follow that up with ongoing tracking of the numbers, I think you'd be, I can only assume you'd be pleasantly surprised that as people feel more secure on the product, the ridership will go up.
Yeah, Chair and Member, I agree. I will make one comment on the data you identified about the gender difference. One thing that we had to kind of skip over in the interest of time, but I think is in your packet you can look into. That also comes along with an age distribution difference. And essentially what we're seeing is there's a shift toward an older male ridership, and where we have lost women the most is in the younger women category. And the only reason I bring that up is because we know from our own research, our own customer surveys, that women experiencing harassment on our system is a pervasive and, issue that we have struggled with and prevents people from feeling comfortable on board and riding as much as they might otherwise. So seeing that in the data only sort of reinforces that we have to tackle that component of it as well.
Good. Member Hollinshead, then Member Narianen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Following up on Member Foster's comment and question, I think in the automotive world, there's a term called trip chaining. Am I correct?
Yeah.
And does that apply also to, for instance, you said that Aaron's is the place where we held ridership or even increased it. And my hunch is that Aaron's tend to be part of trip chains. So do you have a metric that susses out the end-to-end different purpose trip chains as opposed to links in those chains? I'm just curious.
Okay, so Chair, if I might.
Go ahead. Ms. Asmus,
I
go ahead.
love this question. It's so great. Yeah, trip chains, or sometimes we might call them tours, right? Where it's like anchored, a trip starts at one place and you go to work, pick up the kids, get groceries, go home. Yeah, so we might use trip chaining or trip tours sort of interchangeably. When I was describing trip tours to Member Foster, I was also describing trip chains. And while we haven't analyzed them yet, this is a really ripe data set for looking at just that. And our consultant this year is trying out a new type of survey that we haven't had before, kind of an add-on, if you would, where they're asking people not just about that library to work leg of the trip they're on, but about their whole day. Like, how does this transit trip fit into the rest of your day? And they're calling that, I think, a day diary or a travel diary. I'd have to look at that. So we'll have really rich data to come back to you about just that in 2023. Yeah.
Is this going to be available to us as members of the tab on a website someplace? Not necessarily the general public, although you may. I don't know.
Yeah, do you want to get that one?
Sure, Chair and members. Yeah, we're going to make the data itself as well as these summary research results available online. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right, Member Narianen, then Member Koski.
Again, I just wanted to compliment you and your team on such a great survey. I feel like this is just nation leading in truly understanding what's happened since the pandemic hit. The specific things I wanted to kind of explore more were just how much this data lays bare the kind of inequities on transit, specifically who's able to choose not to use transit versus who is dependent on it, and it also shows that this is truly an equity issue. The investing in transit is, we talk a lot about equity in this committee, and it seems like transit investments are one of the best bangs for our buck in terms of actually addressing injustice in transportation. And I also feel like I know that there's perceptions of safety on transit, but also some, lots of our societal issues just kind of present themselves on transit as well, because there's nowhere else for people to go often, or, and the reason why women may have gone down is also because women are disproportionately picking up things like childcare and grocery trips, again, because of patriarchy and how our society is laid out. So this data is so excellent. I also really love the way that the graphics have been used to kind of tell the story. So congratulations on such a great report.
Thank you, Member Narianen. Member Koski.
Thank you, Chair. So I was just in Chicago and used public transportation the entire time I was there. I know a completely different city and system, but I was just curious, has there been a comparison of this new data that we have of ridership and trips to other cities? And if so, have there been helpful findings to support how we think about growing ridership? And then have you seen similarities in the shift and change that we saw from the previous survey?
Yes, thanks, Chair and Member. This is really out there in terms of the first really solid evidence for what a lot of people have been talking about with transit for the last 2 years. And the talking points early on were that we were running transit for essential trip making, people who are doing that essential work to keep our region running, right? Is that when COVID first started and all kinds of travel was stopped, there were still people that needed to get to work at the hospital, get to work at the pharmacy and so on. So this data set kind of shows that we were interpreting that correctly, that when we were seeing that travel still happening, 80,000 trips a day on our system, even during sort of the depths of COVID, we were supporting these basic life functions and also sort of the essential work of the region. So I think what those talking points were kind of bolstered by having this data that's more concrete now. And there aren't too many other places that have it like this now,
Okay.
that I know of.
So this is new. For other
Yeah,
cities don't
what
have
it is really documentation of things that people have been saying in a more aspirational way, right? So like now we know that this is reality. In terms of looking across regions, in terms of sharing ideas, yeah, we have a very good collaboration across transit agencies through a number of different channels, and we're working with colleagues across the country who are all obviously in much the same place. We're not in a unique place in having a decline in our ridership, but we're hoping that we can, build it back.
Ms. Hasmuth, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you for, just to add to that, yeah, it's really new. And one of the things that is unique about the Metropolitan Council is that we have such a strong support for these like survey programs that we do, and it's not cheap to run these surveys. This program itself is a $1.7 million survey, right? It just takes a lot of funds to put people on board buses and trains and send them out. And in some ways, it was kind of risky to do that in fall of 2021, planning that in summer of 2021 with so much uncertainty around COVID. But we knew that the data would be so valuable to our transit providers that we went ahead and did it. So where some transit agencies are taking a wait and see approach to their transit surveys, if they can put it off a year, they're trying to put it off. I think both Metro Transit and the Metropolitan Council, as well as our suburban transit providers, are all asking us to get the data now if we can, and having that support has been really unique. The one thing I would say is that we've asked our consultant to look into surveys that they're doing in other regions to see, in particular, if the gender split, the gender divide, was something that was unique to our region relative to other places, and it's not. It seems like at least these sort of trends toward a male bias and an increasing male bias is not something unique to the Twin Cities. It's a transit issue, yeah.
Member Geisler.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Great presentation. I love the content and data always. Always fun to see this stuff. 2 questions. One around, you had your buckets around time, 6 to 8 p.m. I see these studies a lot. We kind of ignore third shift workers, which is an equity thing, which is a time thing. It's a big deal, especially when we talk about more and more manufacturers running third shifts to catch up with supply chain issues. It really is something that I think we need to get an understanding of. How should our system be supporting these riders more? I know most of the local routes in my town, which is 65,000 people, stop at 10. Mm-hmm. So you can get to work, but you can't get home. Mm-hmm. So that is one of those things that push people off of transit, irregardless of all the rest of it. So I think that would be a great thing to understand as you look to the full one. But the other question I had was, how much do you think this pilot survey represents the system as a whole? Like, what's your confidence level? And again, it's a confidence level, understand that, relative to where you think the rest of the system's at right now.
All right, before you answer that, we're losing members now because of the clock. I'm going to have you hit the pause button because we got people that still want to ask you a couple questions. But Cole, can you come up real quick and talk to people about the team that you're trying to assemble here with respect to the TPP? And I think I know what you want to ask.
Yeah.
Or remind people of.
Thank you, Madam Chair. There was a communication sent out by Elaine probably about 2 weeks ago or so, asking for volunteers for a TPP policymaker working group. I think our experience over the last few TPPs has been this group is really big. We have a lot of work to do here. It doesn't give us the time to dive into the TPP in depth. So we're creating a policymaker work group that includes Met Council members and TAB members to really dive into the details of the TPP and actually expand upon a lot of conversations you're starting today on some of the project and action items you have. So we were looking for a volunteer of a cross-section of all of TAB. We only got about 3 volunteers or 4. We need several others. So what we'll have Elaine do is send out another reminder and include who is volunteered to date, just so that you guys can see where there's still holes. We were generally looking for 3 county reps, 3 city reps, 3 citizen or modal reps. And so we still have a number of vacancies there. So we'll follow up with that. We'll do this presentation on the TPP next month. It's a really important topic, obviously. And so we are hoping to have that group meet in June, maybe not necessarily before the next TAB meeting, but we did want to at least start coordinating schedules for the first meeting of that group. So just a heads up, we'll follow up with the.
Okay, Mayor, do you have a quick question related to that?
Yes, timeframe, guide, what are you looking at?
We are looking, you mean like time of the month?
Well, like how often?
Okay.
How long, how many months?
Yep, roughly every other month. So every 2 months for about, hour and a half. And we aren't set on a date. I think it'll depend on the membership availability. But one of the options we're exploring is maybe another Wednesday in which TAB doesn't meet. So a similar time on a different Wednesday of the month.
And virtual too?
Yeah, we are planning to meet with that group virtually, as long as the members agree.
Okay, good. All right, thanks. Thanks for that. Good
Mr.
reminder.
Chair?
And folks, if you're interested,
Just a quick follow-on comment to Cole's. There a lot of discussion today, whether it was about transit or climate or equity or road expansion or all these different things. If you want to know how to impact these things going into the future, this is a group to get involved with.
okay, good. Thanks, Cole. Ms. Asmussen, Mr. Lynn, do you want to come back up? Okay, do you remember those questions from, those probing questions from Member Geisler? They're always good ones.
Yes, Chair. Thank you. That was a good question. Actually, we do plan service and work with, people that have third shift workers to try to facilitate those commutes. Of course, we can't do that everywhere, but where it's possible, we do try to do that. With respect to the survey itself, it was kind of binned. There were surveys that were taken after 8 p.m. and before 6 a.m., but they were kind of all lumped together into a single category, so there just weren't that many responses. So we're not able to break it down, outside of those hours. But we have, noted that, and for the survey that's being done right now, we're going to try to make sure we can document as much as possible of those trips. Yeah.
Good. And then Mayor Winchell is next, and then we'll go back to Member Lindeke.
Maybe I missed it, but you kind of brought it up again. Were the suburban carriers utilized at all?
Mr. Chair, not in this pre-test or pilot survey last fall. So what we were doing was testing the method and the survey instrument itself and kind of collecting that data on really busy routes that were happening last fall. This year, every single route that's being run in the system is going to be sampled, and that will be the full survey data set.
So, and when you mentioned something about $1.7 million to do the survey, is that, now that's still included in this next piece?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Sorry, yes.
A reminder that the TAB is a major funder of this study.
Thank you.
Sorry,
Member Lindeke, go ahead.
I apologize in advance, Mr. Chair, but a nerdy question, because the service cuts, especially late at night, right? So I think about the Green Line and all the people who are coming home from a concert or from out, partying downtown. All those people are going to be missing because there aren't any trains after 11 o'clock or whatever, right? So compared to 5 years ago, it's a big difference. I don't know, it's just something for you you probably thought of that. I'm sure you thought of that. Yeah. But I just thought of it.
Mr. Chair, that is in the data. I mean, so if you look at that social category of trip purpose, that was one of the bigger ones that have been constrained. And I'm certain if we broke, which we can look at this by route that the sample was taken on. We could probably identify exactly what you're talking about in terms of fewer Green Line riders being of that social category versus maybe university students or something else.
All right, good. Terrific work, as everybody has said. So thanks, and we'll look forward to having you come back when you get that broader survey work done. And come back to us if you need some more funding, I guess.
Good chair.
We'll see what we'll do.